Hey everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how to make a pattern off of your favorite molded cut bra. If you guys haven't seen my other knockoff video, I highly suggest checking it out. I'm going to go ahead and link it, but there's a lot of extra tips and tricks in there that are going to help you have a better knockoff. And this is especially helpful because all of the knockoffs that I show you guys, I don't deconstruct any part of the garment. It's all able to remain completely intact, no seam ripping involved. Okay guys, when you're choosing which garment to pick out in order to knock off, I find that if you have an option with colors, that white is going to be the easiest thing to knock off. I find that you're able to see the seams and everything so much better whenever we get to the part where we're actually tracing, but it's possible to do it with any color garment, so don't let that discourage you or anything, but if you have an option, definitely choose white. So if you were to seam rip this entire bra apart to try and get the pattern pieces, you'll notice that our cups are not going to lay flat no matter what. It has nothing to do with the patterning, and it has everything to do with the fact that the bra cups on t-shirt bras are actually molded using a molding machine in the manufacturing process. So we can't get that at home, or at least most of us can't get that at home. So our next best option, and many would argue a better option to the molded cup bra, is to actually create a 2 or 3 piece seamed cup. So to do this, our first step is going to be to decide where we want our seam lines to go. Now for this demonstration, I'm just going to do it into 2 pattern pieces for the cup. However, for my size, I probably should have went with a 3 cup, but I wasn't planning on keeping this particular pattern anyways, so it didn't matter to me. But just be aware that the larger in cup size you get, the more likely you are to need extra pieces in order to accommodate all that extra shaping that you have. And if you're unsure of how many pieces you need, I really suggest just looking up your size in a brand that carries seamed bras and just seeing how many pieces they use for their cup, and that can kind of help you determine if you don't actually own any seamed bras already. Once you've decided how many pieces you need, go ahead and put your bra on, and now we can decide where we want our seam lines to go. So I really recommend that regardless of how many seams you do, you keep at least one of those seams pretty close to where the apex is, which is your nipple, because that's going to be the fullest part of your bust. And so to get the best fit and the best curves, that's kind of ideally where you want a seam line to be at, is just to pass through that spot. It doesn't have to pass through exactly. It could be pretty close. Sometimes, you know, people, they like to raise it a little bit if they're doing a horizontal seam. That way they could do like a top cup that's sheer and you won't see anything. It's 100% up to you, but for the best fit, I find passing through that spot is ideal. I am, for this demo, marking the bra with the straight pins going straight through the cup. Don't recommend that for you if you're actually trying it on, but this is the least messy way for me to show you guys. But if you have a dissolving marker or style tape, that's probably more ideal than using straight pins. Moving on to actually tracing off our cup, I like to use a fusible interfacing with the fusible side up, so the little textured side will be face up, so it's a little bit easier to write on. Some people like to use tissue paper, and that's fine too. Personally, I don't, because I find it to be a little bit too fragile. And some people also like to use a tracing wheel with paper underneath, but I find that especially with this project, it's too shapely and it's a little difficult for you to actually get it flat in order for you to trace it off. So I prefer not having to manipulate my garment too much if I can help it, so I like this method a lot better. So the first few pins I put in, I kind of treat them like anchors, and I'll first put a pin on the cup but near the bridge, and then I will smooth the interfacing over the cup, and I'll put another pin where it hits my new seam line that I just created. From there, we can just use those as anchor points and smooth our interfacing down and work on the bottom half of the cup by pinning our underwire and then also putting some pins where our seam line is at. Once I finished pinning the bottom, I went ahead and started pinning the top half of the bra, and I started with the bridge area and worked around the neckline and then came back down the seam line that we created earlier till I got back to the apex. So let's talk about this excess fullness that we're seeing in the center of my cup. You'll see that the fabric, the interfacing is starting to kind of like wrinkle over and stuff because there's a little bit too much fullness there. So there's a couple things that you can do. So first off, the if this ends up happening to you and you just leave it alone, your cut pieces are not going to walk. And this is okay sometimes if you are not working with foam, because you have seam allowances and you can ease them together if it's not too much, right? But if you are creating a foam bra to kind of mimic this molded cut bra that we're rubbing off, those pieces are usually stitched together flat, if that makes sense. You'll like zigzag over them to join them, so there'll be no seam allowance and it'd be very difficult to ease them. I don't recommend it. So your first option is to either adjust your pattern. If it's not too much, you can kind of tweak it a little bit just to make them walk. So you'll lengthen the short side and shorten the long side, right? However, if you have quite a bit of fullness, then you might find that instead of having a 2-piece cup, you need to actually create a 3-piece cup. And like I said, the larger your cups get, not your band size, but your actual cup size, the larger it gets, the more pieces that you will more than likely need. So just keep that in mind when you're choosing this. You can see there's quite a bit here. It's not too bad, but I guarantee you that once my pattern is done and I walk the pieces, that it would probably be a pretty significant difference once it's actually on paper. Now, if you feel like you have the appropriate number of pattern pieces and you're still having this issue, you might need to just shift your style lines slightly, because it's possible that your style lines are just too far away from your apex. So just shifting them slightly should fix the problem. Now we can start tracing off our pattern. I like to start at the bridge once again, but it's up to you where you start. You can see here that the cup of my bra is smushed down slightly, and you'll notice later that where I started to trace off with the bridge, once my cup was popped back out, I needed to do a little bit of adjusting, and you're going to see that in a second. And make sure that you mark where the bridge of your bra is actually going to connect to the cup, because you're probably going to want to put a notch there later. Once you start marking that inner cup seam that we created, you might find that you want to move your pins slightly in and to the left of the markings that you have on your bra, because it is a little bit difficult sometimes to see through the interfacing depending on the weight that you get. And this way you can just lift up the interfacing slightly and see where they're at or feel where they're at and then mark. But I like to use straight pins for this reason, because I can generally feel them through the interfacing just fine without having to lift anything up. And now we can go ahead and mark around the neckline of our bra and connect all of the corners. And before I unpin anything, I like to just, if I had to flatten the bra at all in any spot, I like to go ahead and pop it back up so it's sitting the way it's supposed to. That way I can see that all of my lines that I drew are actually on the perimeter and they're not out of whack anywhere. Here you can see that spot that I messed up just a little bit, so I'm just going to go back and draw a line with my bra cup actually popped out to try and get a more accurate pattern piece. And just a quick note, here's something that I forgot to mention earlier. Whenever you're putting your pins in your bra cup, make sure you put one at the very base of your bra so you have that intersection point between the underwire casing and your new seam line. And with that side completed, I'm going to go ahead and just pin it away from our seam line pins. That way I can start working on the other side. Okay, so I don't have any footage of me actually pinning this side of the cup, so I'm sorry about that, but I basically just did the exact same thing. I just repeated it on the outside cup. I made sure to start at the top outer portion of the bra cup where your armpit would be at. So I started there and I pinned across towards the apex and then did the lower half and then did the upper half. So exactly like what I did on the other side. Now I'm going to start tracing it off. So I like to start at that underarm seam and then work my way through the armhole and up to the strap. Once I get to the strap, I only trace off the corner edges of each side because I know it's going to be a straight line, and so I'll just connect those with a ruler later on, so getting the middle part's not important. From the strap, I trace off all of my pins for my new seam line, and then I finish tracing around the rest of the underwire. After you're done tracing, it's always a good idea to double check the perimeter and just make sure that everything looks as accurate as possible. Make sure your bra cup is fully popped out whenever you're doing this. And if you flip your bra over, you'll see inside of your molded cup, it will definitely be obvious if at any point your fusing is pulled too tightly, because the bra cup will be collapsed in parts. But here you can see mine's looking pretty decent. Yeah, so if it's collapsed, it's going to kind of look like this. You're going to get like a lot of little extra wrinkles and stuff, and you're not going to be able to fully pop it out. And don't forget to do the bridge piece of your bra. It's probably the simplest, so I don't really have a whole lot of tips for this. There's no stretch in it, and so you can pretty much just use your fusing and rub it off as is. Or you could even take measurements and go directly on paper. The key for the bridge is just to make sure that it is symmetrical whenever you finish your pattern piece. Moving on to our band, this area can get a little bit tricky, so I'm going to try and give you all the tips all at once, so that way hopefully you guys can get the most accurate pattern piece possible. So the first thing we're doing is we're not using any fusible, and we're going to use a piece of cork underneath if you can. That's going to make it easiest to actually rub this off. So I like to take some thumbtacks and put them into the cup part of my bra. You can definitely use pins, just make sure you use a lot of them to keep them in place, because that elastic will be strong and will want to rip your bra right out of that cork. So there's a few things to keep in mind whenever you are looking at patterning your band. So for starters, your band has a lot of elastic in it. It's generally not just at the bottom, it's going to be on the top edges as well. And that elastic is sucking your pattern piece in and making it appear smaller than what it was actually cut at. So we're going to have to stretch that back out in order to get an accurate pattern piece. Now, if you have a woven fabric that your band is made out of, you can pretty much just stretch the band out and trace around it and you're good to go. However, I think a lot of us probably have a knit fabric, and that's what this bra is that I'm showing you guys. So it's going to be a little bit more tricky because we don't want to overstretch our band and end up with too big of a pattern piece. So the way that I do this is whenever I go to stretch my band out, I pay really close attention to the grain of the fabric. I know it's really difficult to see here in this video, but I do have lines going straight up and down from the band to the underarm. And whenever you're not stretching your fabric, you'll notice that it's slanted. And if you overstretch your fabric, you're going to notice that it slants in the opposite direction. But if you stretch it perfectly across, you're going to want to stop whenever it is perpendicular to the bottom elastic, because generally the bottom of our band is going to be a straight line or very close to it. So I stretch until that point. And here you can see that once you smooth up to the top where your strap's at, it should not have any gaping around that elastic, and all of your wrinkles should pretty much be smoothed out at this point. When you get your band stretched out as far as you think you need to, go ahead and pin around the perimeter. Try and keep it pretty close to the edge while still being able to trace everything off, because if you put it too far in on the band, it's going to the elastic's going to suck back in. So you want to be pretty far out if possible. If you want to, you can try and pin through the elastic. Just be very careful, because it is easy to damage the elastic, and you definitely want to be careful with that. Once you're satisfied with how your band is looking, once it's all pinned down, you can go ahead and start tracing the band. Using a tracing wheel, trace the seam that connects your band to your cup where the underwire is. If you don't have a tracing wheel, that's fine too. You can just use a push pin and create small markings along that seam line. Then when you're done with that, you can go ahead and just use a pen or pencil and mark around the perimeter of your bra. When you get to any part that has elastic, trace it off as is, because we may or may not be using the same size elastic in the same finishing techniques, but what we do want is to know exactly where our bra finishes. That way, regardless of what kind of elastic we end up using, we can easily make adjustments to our pattern later. And I know it's really difficult to see here, but those push pins that are on the right side of my bra are a little bit too far in. As you can see, my elastic was still sucking in just a bit past that point. So I did stretch it back out to where it needs to land, and I put a push pin in the closure before I finished tracing off the rest of my bra band. And for my center back, as well as the strap, I once again only marked the corners because I know for a fact that both of those are going to be straight lines, so I didn't feel it necessary to try and draw that line in. I can just do it later with a ruler. So once you remove your fusing pieces from your bra, this is what you're going to end up with. This is the first piece that I traced, and you're just going to put it on top of some white paper, and you can use a tracing wheel to trace it off. But first, I'm going to go ahead and connect all of my lines with a pen just so you guys can see it a little bit easier. Whether you do it now or you clean up your lines later on paper is 100% up to you. I do a little bit of both a lot of the times, just because I feel like I get a better shape in the long run whenever I do it this way. So as you can see, I do a lot of freehanding whenever I am knocking stuff off. You definitely don't have to just eyeball it. You can use a French ruler or a hip curve or just anything curved that you have just to get smoother, better lines. That's perfectly fine. I do that after I trace it to paper. This is just the method that I like to do, but you can definitely mix it up whenever you are tracing things off. So here you can see that my dotted lines, where that new seam line is that I created, it kind of curves in a little bit before getting to the apex where it curves back out. So I went ahead and just left that for now, but I do clean it up later on. I'm going to show you how to do that whenever you kind of have some wobbly, not so great line work going on. From here, you can definitely add your seam allowances, cut it out, and then transfer that to paper, or you can cut it out without seam allowance, whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and use a tracing wheel and a piece of cork that I got from the IKEA kitchen section, and I'm going to just trace it off to my paper that way. Once we're done tracing off our pattern piece, you'll see all these little dots on our paper, and we can just connect them using a French ruler and a pen. And here you can see that little dip in my pattern where that's right above the apex on the seam line that we created out of nothing. I'm just going to ignore it. I don't think that our cut piece should be S-shaped. I think it should be relatively C-shaped. So that's the shape that I'm going to create. I think that that was just bad tracing off on my part, and so I'm just going to do a little bit of correction there. Now, I'm not super experienced with bra making, but I do feel that that's a pretty safe correction. However, if you're having the same issue, you might do it with that little S shape in there and then fit your bra and see if you actually need more curve in that seam line, just to play it safe. Once I've traced around the entire border, I like to go back, add that notch for the bridge, and then if you want to, in your fashion fabric that's going to actually have a seam in it, you can put notches above and below the apex, just to help you sew that curve, because it can be a little bit difficult sometimes. But keep in mind that for your foam pieces that you do this with, you're probably not going to want any notches. Now we can repeat that process on our other pattern piece. Just make sure that you also notch where your band is going to connect to that bra cup. And here are our completed bra cups and also our completed back band once you connect all the dots on that piece. Now keep in mind, this is a very rough first draft, and there's going to be a lot of changes you're probably going to want to make before you ever cut into any fabric. So let me show you a few things I already see wrong with my pattern. So for starters, whenever I line up the outer cup and the band, you can see that the underarm area is not the smoothest look, so I probably am going to want to smooth that seam down. Also, I'm going to want to measure where my strap elastics go and make sure that they're equal, but also make sure that they are going to measure the amount that I'm going to need for whatever strap elastic I choose, just in case the strap elastic I choose is different than the one that was on the store-bought bra. Same thing with our hook and eye closure. We're going to have to take a look at that. And you're also going to want to walk all of your seams and make sure that all of your pieces are matching up. You don't want to be in the middle of sewing and realize that one piece is way longer than another piece. And that is especially true on your new cup seam that you created. And lastly, don't forget to account for differences in trim and elastic and straps. The measurements are going to need to be accounted for on your pattern if you don't use the exact same size elastics and everything on your new bra. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've stuck it through this long, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and give this video a like if you found it useful.